Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got another wild Reddit story for you tonight. And as always, we'll be building something in Minecraft while we unpack the chaos. Sometimes the most satisfying stories are the ones where someone plays the long game, collects every receipt, and waits for the perfect moment to burn it all down. Before we dive in, I just want to give a massive shout out to everyone who's been in the comments, showing love and supporting the channel. Seriously, thank you. It means more than you know, and it's what keeps this whole wild ride going. So settle in because this story starts with a perfect family image and ends with a mask cracking wide open in front of everyone. For years, this person smiled through the manipulation, the control, and the outburst that only happened behind closed doors, because who would believe them over the perfect parent everyone adored? Growing up, my stepdad was everyone's hero, coach of the local youth soccer team, church volunteer, the guy who supposedly saved our broken family after my parents' messy divorce. My mum would tell anyone who'd listen how lucky we were that he came into our lives. Neighbors loved him, teachers loved him, even my friends thought he was the cool dad. And for a while, I tried to believe it too. I wanted so badly to believe that we'd finally found stability, that things were going to be okay now. But behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. Someone cold, someone controlling, someone who made me feel like I was walking on eggshells every single day of my life. He controlled everything: what I wore, who I talked to, how much I ate, when I could leave my room, what activities I could join. If I wanted to hang out with friends, he'd interrogate me for 20 minutes about where we were going, who'd be there, what we'd be doing, and even after all that, he'd usually say no anyway. He'd tell my mom I was being difficult, that I had an attitude problem, that I needed structure. She believed him every time. The worst part was how he'd scream at me until I was sobbing. Then the second my mum walked in the room, he'd pull me into a hug like he was comforting me, like he was the good guy trying to calm down his emotional, unstable stepdaughter. And I learned to play along. I learned to smile through it, to say I was fine, to pretend everything was perfect. Because when I didn't, it only got worse. I tried telling my mum once when I was 14. I sat her down and told her that he scared me, that he said horrible things to me when she wasn't around. She looked at me with this pained expression and said she'd talk to him. That night, I heard them arguing. The next morning, he didn't speak to me for a week. Just cold silence and this look that told me exactly what would happen if I tried that again. My mom never brought it up. I realized then that I was on my own. For 3 years, I just survived. I kept my head down, I followed his rules, I stayed quiet. I told myself I just had to make it to 18, and then I could leave. I could go to college, get away, start over. I just had to hold on. Then I turned 17, and he smashed my phone during an argument. We'd been fighting because I'd stayed an extra hour after school to work on a group project without texting him first. He was furious. He cornered me in the kitchen, screaming about disrespect and disobedience, his face inches from mine. I tried to explain, but he ripped the phone out of my hand and threw it against the wall. It shattered. I just stood there, shaking, staring at the pieces on the floor, and for the first time, I saw my mum's face crack. Just for a second, this flicker of doubt, maybe even fear. She didn't say anything, but I saw it, and that's when I realized she wasn't completely blind. She was just choosing not to see. That's when I decided I needed proof, something she couldn't ignore, something he couldn't talk his way out of. I had an old iPod Touch I'd gotten years ago, before he came into our lives. It still worked and it had a voice memo app. I hid it in my bookshelf behind a row of books I knew he'd never touch, and I started recording. Every time he started yelling, I'd hit record. Every time he called me worthless, stupid, a disappointment. Every time he told me I was the problem, that I was lucky he even tolerated me. 3 months of evidence, hours and hours of him saying things no parent should ever say to a child. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed it. Here's where it gets absurd. He decided to call a family meeting. My mum, my grandparents, him and me. He told everyone it was because I'd been spreading lies about him at school, that I was trying to ruin his reputation, that I needed to be confronted about my behavior. My mum looked stressed, my grandparents looked concerned, and he looked so calm, so confident, like he'd already won. He started the meeting by talking about how much he loved me, how hard he'd tried to be a good father figure, how hurt he was that I was acting out like this. My grandmother reached over and squeezed my hand, like she felt bad for him. I felt sick. Then he turned to me and said, "Do you have anything you want to say? Any reason you've been telling people I'm a bad parent?" I pulled out the iPod. I didn't say anything. I just pressed play. The room went completely silent. You could hear his voice screaming at me about forgetting to take the trash out, calling me useless, calling me a burden, telling me I'd ruin my mother's life, telling me no one would ever love me if I kept acting like this. My mum's face went white. My grandmother's hand tightened around mine. My grandfather's jaw clenched. The recording kept going. Another fight, another tirade, him telling me I was pathetic for crying, that I needed to toughen up, that I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too everything. He lunged for the iPod, just reached across the table and tried to grab it out of my hands. My grandfather stood up so fast his chair fell backward, and he stepped between us. I'd never seen my grandfather look at someone like that. Pure disgust. My mom was crying. She looked at him and said, "Is this real? Is this what you've been doing?" He tried to backtrack, said I'd edited the recordings, that I'd taken things out of context, that I was manipulating everyone. But my grandmother asked to hear more, so I played another one, and another. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, back to what happened when my grandfather stepped in. My grandfather told him to get out of the house. Right then, my stepdad tried to argue, tried to say this was his home too, that he had rights. My grandfather just repeated it. Get out. My mum didn't say anything. She just sat there staring at her hands, crying quietly. He looked at her, waiting for her to defend him. She didn't. He left. Slammed the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. My mum filed for divorce that week. She apologized to me over and over, said she didn't know, that she should have seen it, should have protected me. I don't know if I believe that she didn't know, but I think she didn't want to know. And maybe that's worse. Word got around fast in our town. My mum told a few people what happened, and it spread. Parents at his soccer team found out. The church found out. He lost his coaching job within 2 weeks. Parents didn't want him around their kids anymore. The church quietly asked him to step down from his volunteer roles. The perfect image he'd spent years building just shattered. Completely. People who used to shake his hand at the grocery store wouldn't even make eye contact. He tried to save face, posted some vague thing on social media about being attacked by lies and slander. No one bought it. He moved 2 towns over. I haven't seen him since the divorce was finalized. My mum's been in therapy. So have I. She's trying. I'm trying. It's not perfect, but it's better. So much better. That recording didn't just free me. It started a chain reaction I never saw coming. Speaking of families hiding the truth, Thanksgiving in our family had always been tense. You know the kind of tension I'm talking about. The kind where everyone smiles too hard, laughs too loud at jokes that aren't funny, and steers conversation away from anything remotely controversial, like they're navigating a minefield. We'd perfected the art of pretending everything was fine. Aunt Linda's passive-aggressive comments about Mum's cooking, we ignored them. Uncle Rick's tendency to drink a little too much and get weirdly political, we changed the subject. My cousin Emma's messy divorce that everyone had opinions about but nobody acknowledged, absolutely off limits. We kept it civil because that's what you do. You show up, you eat dry turkey, you make small talk about the weather, and you go home. That was the unspoken rule. This year started no different. Mum spent 2 days cooking. Dad set up the folding tables in the living room because we'd outgrown the dining room years ago. My brother and I helped arrange chairs and pretended we were excited about spending 6 hours with relatives we barely talked to the rest of the year. Emma showed up looking tired but put together, clearly bracing herself for the inevitable commentary about her personal life. Aunt Linda arrived with her famous green bean casserole that nobody actually liked but everyone complimented. And then Uncle Rick walked in. He was already drunk. Not tipsy. Drunk. You could smell the whiskey from across the room, and it wasn't even noon yet. He had that glassy-eyed look, that overly confident swagger that comes right before someone says something they'll regret. My dad shot my mum a look. She gave him the tiniest headshake, the universal signal for let's just get through this. So we sat down, we said grace, we passed dishes, and for about 20 minutes it almost worked. Then Uncle Rick started in on Emma. It began with little jabs disguised as concern. "So, Emma, you seeing anyone new? Or are you still working through your issues?" She smiled tightly and said she was focusing on herself. He laughed. "That's code for nobody wants damaged goods, huh?" The table went quiet. My dad tried to redirect. "Rick, how's work going?" But Uncle Rick was locked in now, and Emma was his target. He kept going, kept pushing, kept making comments about how she'd given up too easily, how marriage takes work, how her generation didn't understand commitment. Emma didn't respond. She just sat there, cutting her turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, her jaw tight. I could see her hand shaking slightly. Aunt Linda, his wife, wasn't even trying to stop him. She just stared at her plate like this was normal dinner conversation. And maybe for them, it was. But then Uncle Rick said it. The thing that broke the dam. He leaned back in his chair, took another swig from his glass, and said, "At least I didn't raise a quitter." Emma's fork clattered onto her plate. The sound echoed. She stood up slowly, and for a second I thought she was just going to leave. Walk out. Let him win. But she didn't. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it with hands that were no longer shaking. Her voice was steady, calm, terrifyingly calm. "You want to talk about quitting, Dad? Let's talk about quitting." She started reading. Out loud, text messages between Aunt Linda and her sister. Messages about money. Lots of money. Money that Uncle Rick thought had been going toward their mortgage payments for the last several years. Money that had actually been funneled to Aunt Linda's sister to cover gambling debts, bad investments, and God knows what else. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. Emma read dates, amounts, conversations where Aunt Linda and her sister laughed about how clueless Rick was, how easy it was to hide. Uncle Rick's face went from red to purple. He lunged across the table. Dishes crashed. My dad jumped up and grabbed him, physically restraining him while he shouted incoherently. Aunt Linda was screaming now too, but not at Rick, at Emma, calling her a liar, a manipulator, demanding to know where she got those texts. And that's when she said it, the thing that made my mum's face go completely white. "She got them from me." Everyone turned. Aunt Linda was staring at my dad. "Not Uncle Rick, my dad." "He knew," she screamed. "He's known for 2 years. He helped me hide it. He helped me set up the accounts." The room went silent except for the sound of my mom's chair scraping back. She stood up slowly, and I watched her look at my dad with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal. Pure, unfiltered betrayal. "You knew?" Her voice was barely a whisper. My dad opened his mouth, closed it, stammered something about trying to help Linda, about not wanting to cause drama, about thinking they'd work it out. My mom didn't wait for the full explanation. She grabbed her coat and walked out the front door. Just left, in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. Emma kept reading, because apparently we weren't done yet. More texts. Conversations about loans my grandparents had given Aunt Linda that were never paid back, secret credit cards, a whole shadow financial life that spanned a decade, and with each new revelation, another crack formed. Uncle Rick was shouting at Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda was shouting at my dad. My dad was trying to go after my mum. My brother and I just sat there like we were watching a building collapse in slow motion. By the time dessert was supposed to happen, 3 couples weren't speaking. Uncle Rick and Aunt Linda left separately. My dad spent the night at a hotel. My mom wouldn't answer his calls. Emma sat at the table with me and my brother, and we ate pie in complete silence while the remains of dinner congealed on plates nobody had cleared. 2 weeks later, my parents separated. Not divorced, not yet, but separated. My dad moved into an apartment across town. My mum started seeing a therapist. Uncle Rick and Aunt Linda's divorce was filed within a month, and it was brutal. The kind of divorce where lawyers send certified letters and assets get frozen. Emma stopped coming to family events altogether, and honestly, I didn't blame her. She'd pulled the thread and the whole thing had unraveled. We haven't had a holiday together since. Not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, not Easter. My brother and I split time between parents now like we're teenagers again instead of adults in our 30s. Some cousins took sides, others just stopped showing up. The family group chat that used to coordinate gatherings went silent. Every now and then, someone sends a generic "hope everyone's well" message that nobody responds to. The thing is, Emma didn't set out to destroy the family. She just got tired of being the punching bag, tired of being the failure, the quitter, the cautionary tale everyone whispered about. And when she finally defended herself, when she finally said, "No, let's talk about your mess instead of mine," the whole facade crumbled, because it turned out our family wasn't held together by love or loyalty. It was held together by secrets, by unspoken agreements to look the other way, by everyone pretending they didn't see the cracks. And once those secrets were out, once the pretending stopped, there was nothing left holding us together. You almost have to respect the absolute precision of it. Emma didn't yell, didn't cry. She just calmly read receipts until the whole house of cards collapsed. And honestly, I think she knew exactly what would happen. I think she walked into that dinner knowing it would be the last one. Sometimes the cost of telling the truth is everything, and sometimes that's a price worth paying. Families protect their secrets until someone pulls the thread, but corporate secrets, those unravel even faster when ego gets involved. I'd spent 2 years at the company before Derek became my manager, and honestly, things were fine at first. He had this polished corporate charisma, the kind where he'd slap you on the back and call you a rock star in meetings, but couldn't remember your project details 5 minutes later. Still, when he pulled me aside and said he wanted me leading the Q3 product launch, I was excited. This was the kind of project that could actually move my career forward. He kept saying it would make my career, that this was my chance to shine, that he'd make sure the right people noticed my work, so I gave it everything. 80-hour weeks became normal. I was in the office before sunrise, staying until the cleaning crew showed up. I coordinated with design, engineering, marketing, external vendors. I built timelines, tracked every milestone, sent Derek weekly updates that he'd skim and reply to with a thumbs up emoji. My friends stopped inviting me out. My partner got used to eating dinner alone. I told myself it would be worth it when the launch went live and the numbers came in. Then, about 6 weeks before launch, Derek called me into his office. He had that concerned manager face on, the one that's supposed to look empathetic but really just screams damage control. He told me we needed to cut the budget by 30%. Just like that, 30%. I stared at him, trying to process what that would mean. I'd already locked in vendor contracts, committed to ad placements, promised deliverables to partners. Cutting that much would gut the entire strategy. I pushed back. I walked him through every line item, showed him exactly what we'd lose, explained how the cuts would tank our projections. He nodded along like he was listening, but I could tell he'd already made up his mind. He said the decision came from above, that his hands were tied, that I'd need to make it work. So I did what I could. I renegotiated where possible, scaled back features, cut corners I knew would hurt us later. I sent him a detailed email outlining the risks, the likely impact on performance, everything I thought could go wrong. He replied saying he appreciated my diligence and that he trusted my judgment. Launch day came. The numbers were bad, not just disappointing, but legitimately terrible. Conversion rates were half of what we'd projected. User engagement was a mess. The product worked technically, but it felt cheap and half-finished because, well, it was. I knew it was coming, but watching it unfold in real time still stung. I'd poured months of my life into this thing, and it landed with a thud. 2 days later, I got called into a meeting with Derek and two executives I'd only seen in all-hands presentations. My stomach dropped the second I walked in. Derek didn't even look at me. One of the executives, a guy named Paul, opened a folder and started listing failures. Missed deadlines, poor resource allocation, lack of communication with stakeholders. I sat there stunned because none of it was true. I'd hit every major deadline. I'd communicated constantly. Then Paul said Derek had raised concerns weeks ago about my project management and that this outcome, unfortunately, confirmed those concerns. I looked at Derek. He gave me this apologetic shrug, like he was just as disappointed as they were. He said he'd tried to course correct, that he'd offered guidance I hadn't taken, that he'd warned me the budget cuts would require a different approach. I felt my face go hot. I wanted to scream, but I just sat there while they explained I'd be placed on a performance improvement plan. 60 days to demonstrate I could meet expectations. One more failure and I'd be let go. I left that meeting shaking. Not sad, just furious. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at my email. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fight this. Then I remembered something. A few months earlier, Derek had CC'd me on an email to his director, probably by accident. I'd skimmed it at the time and moved on, but now I went digging through my archives. There it was, an email chain from early June, right around when he'd cut my budget. Derek had written to his director about reallocating resources from my launch to fund a new analytics dashboard he wanted to build. His pet project. He called it a strategic priority and said my project had enough momentum to succeed with a leaner budget. He didn't mention that I'd objected. He didn't mention the risks. He just framed it like a smart executive decision. I kept digging. There were more emails, updates to his director where he took credit for milestones I'd hit, a message where he bragged about managing team resources efficiently, another where he downplayed concerns I'd raised, calling them overly cautious. I pulled timestamps, cross-referenced them with meeting notes, checked Slack messages. Everything pointed to the same story. Derek had gutted my project to fund his own, then set me up to take the fall when it crashed. The thing that really got me was how calculated it was. He hadn't just made a bad call, he'd actively lied in writing to multiple people, knowing I'd be the one left holding the bag. I didn't sleep that night. I kept reading through the emails, making sure I wasn't missing something, that I wasn't overreacting. By morning, I'd made my decision. I forwarded everything to HR, every email, every timestamp. I wrote a cover message explaining the timeline, how Derek had misrepresented the project to leadership, how he'd falsified his account of events in the meeting. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. HR responded within 2 hours asking to schedule a call. The rep, a woman named Karen, sounded surprised but professional. She said they'd need to review the materials and that someone would follow up. I figured that was corporate speak for we'll file this away and nothing will happen, but I'd at least tried. Then came the breaking point. A week later, I got an email from Karen asking me to join a call with the VP of Operations and someone from legal. My hands were sweating when I dialed in. They asked me to walk through everything again. I did, methodically, referencing specific emails and dates. The VP, a guy named Richard, didn't say much, but I could hear him typing. After about 30 minutes, he thanked me and said they'd be in touch. 2 days after that, Derek didn't show up to work. His Slack status stayed offline. People started whispering. Then, on Friday afternoon, we got an email from Richard announcing an internal review of project management practices and resource allocation. Derek's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. The following Monday, Derek's desk was empty. No goodbye email, no farewell happy hour, just gone. Word spread fast. Apparently, HR hadn't just looked into my situation. They'd dug deeper and found a pattern. Derek had pulled similar moves before, shifting budgets, blaming junior staff when things went sideways, taking credit when things worked. He'd falsified performance reports to make himself look better. The review found enough to justify termination, but they gave him the option to resign quietly. This feels like one of those situations where someone got so used to getting away with things that they stopped being careful. A month later, I got called into Richard's office. I was nervous, figured maybe this was the part where they thanked me for my service and showed me the door anyway. Instead, Richard apologized. He said the company had failed me, that Derek's behavior was unacceptable, and that they were taking steps to prevent it from happening again. He also said my performance improvement plan was being rescinded, and that they wanted to discuss my future with the company. 6 months after that, I got promoted to senior project manager with a significant raise. They even gave me back pay for the months I'd spent under the PIP. I didn't ask for it, but I wasn't going to say no. Derek's LinkedIn still lists his time at the company with some vague language about pursuing other opportunities and exploring new challenges. No mention of being fired, no mention of the lies, just corporate euphemisms and a profile photo where he's smiling in a suit. I don't check his profile anymore, but for a while I did. I wanted to see if he'd landed somewhere new, if he was doing the same thing to someone else. Last I saw, he was doing contract work and posting motivational quotes about leadership. The irony wasn't lost on me. Looking back, I think the scariest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how close it came to working. If I hadn't been CC'd on those emails, if I hadn't kept records, if I'd just accepted the PIP and tried to move on, Derek would have gotten away with it. He'd have kept climbing, kept throwing people under the bus, kept rewriting history to suit himself. Sometimes the receipts are digital. Other times they're hidden in plain sight. like when surveillance becomes evidence. I found the voice recorder taped under our kitchen table during spring cleaning. Just there, stuck to the underside with duct tape, a small black device I almost missed. My hand froze on it. For a second, I thought maybe it was old. Maybe it had been there from a previous tenant. Maybe it was nothing. But our apartment was new construction. We were the first people to live here. And the tape was fresh. My stomach dropped in a way I can't really describe. You know that feeling when your brain is trying to catch up with what your gut already knows? That split second where you're bargaining with reality, trying to find an innocent explanation even though you already know there isn't one? I sat there on the floor, holding this thing, and I felt the air change, felt my life shift into before and after, before I found it, and after. I didn't confront him. Something told me not to. Instead, I waited until he left for his weekly poker night, and I checked the files. Dozens of recordings, our arguments mostly, but they'd been edited, clipped, rearranged, saved with labels like her losing it, and proof of instability, and anger issues, March 15th. I listened to one. It was from a fight we'd had about him forgetting my birthday. But the recording started mid-argument, right where I'd raised my voice. All the context before, where he'd laughed it off and said birthdays didn't matter, where he'd made me feel stupid for being hurt. Gone. It was just me, sounding shrill and unreasonable, yelling about nothing. He was building a case against me, methodically, carefully, and I had no idea how long he'd been doing it or what he planned to use it for. Custody, maybe, if we ever had kids. Ammunition if I ever tried to leave. Proof that I was unstable, unhinged, the crazy girlfriend he'd have to protect himself from. I felt physically sick. This person I'd been living with, sleeping next to, planning a future with, had been secretly recording me, editing my words, twisting our relationship into evidence against me. I copied everything to a cloud drive that night, every single file. Then I put the recorder back exactly where I'd found it. Here's where things took a turn I didn't expect. I couldn't stop thinking about those labels. Proof of instability. He wasn't just recording me, he was narrating a story, creating a version of me that didn't exist. And if he was doing that with audio, what else was he doing? What was he telling people? I needed to know what I was actually dealing with. So I bought a small camera, the kind that looks like a phone charger. I set it up in the living room, angled toward the couch where he usually sat when he made phone calls. And then I waited. 2 days later, he exploded over dishes. I'd left a pan in the sink overnight because I'd been exhausted after a double shift at work. He came into the bedroom where I was getting ready and just started screaming. About the pan, about how I never cleaned up after myself, about how he did everything around here and I was lazy and inconsiderate. He got inches from my face, his voice getting louder and louder, and I just stood there. Didn't respond, didn't argue back, just stayed completely silent while he yelled himself out. It took everything in me not to defend myself, not to point out that I deep cleaned the entire apartment 3 days ago while he played video games, not to remind him that I worked 50 hours last week while he called in sick twice. But I stayed quiet, because I knew the recorder was under the kitchen table, and I wanted him to have exactly what he wanted. Me, silent. Him, out of control. Later that night, I heard him on the phone with his mum. I was in the bedroom and he was in the living room, and he had her on speaker. He told her I'd attacked him, that I'd shoved him during an argument over nothing, that he was scared of me, that my temper was getting worse, that he didn't know what to do. His mom asked if he was okay. He sighed and said yeah, he was fine, he de-escalated it, but he was worried about what might happen next time. He sounded so convincing, so genuinely concerned, like he actually believed the story he was telling. I had it all on video, him screaming at me while I stood silently, him walking away and immediately calling his mom to lie. The timestamp matched perfectly. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. That's when I knew I had to leave. Not eventually, not when things got better or when we worked through it or when he got help. Now, because this wasn't going to stop. It was only going to escalate. And the more ammunition he collected, the harder it would be for me to get out safely. I consulted a lawyer the next day during my lunch break. Brought my laptop, showed her everything, the original recordings he'd made, The edited versions, the video of him lying to his family, all of it. She took notes, asked questions, and then she looked at me and said, "You need to leave while he's not home. Don't tell him you're going. Don't leave a note. Just go." So I did. I waited until he left for work on a Tuesday morning. I'd already packed a bag and hidden it at my best friend's place. I'd opened a new bank account he didn't know about and moved half our savings into it, which was legally mine anyway. I took my documents, my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry, and anything I couldn't replace. I left the furniture, left the dishes, left the life we'd built. And I filed for a restraining order that afternoon with all the recordings as evidence. The judge granted it immediately. Temporary at first, then permanent after the hearing. My ex tried to argue that I was the unstable one, that he had proof. His lawyer actually submitted some of the edited audio recordings, but my lawyer played the full, unedited versions I'd copied, played the video of him lying to his mother, showed the timestamps, showed the pattern. The judge wasn't impressed. You could see it on her face the moment she realized what he'd been doing. She granted the restraining order and made a note in the file about his behavior. My ex just sat there, staring at me like he couldn't comprehend what was happening, like he'd been so sure of his plan, so confident in his strategy, that he'd never considered I might find out, might fight back, might win. He never saw it coming. And honestly, that was the most satisfying part. He'd spent months building a case against me, manipulating our reality, crafting a narrative, and in the end, his own recordings were what buried him. The proof of instability wasn't me. It was him. It had always been him. I haven't spoken to him since the final hearing, blocked him on everything, moved to a different part of town, started over, and every time I'm tempted to feel bad about how it ended, I remember those file labels. Her losing it. Proof of instability. I remember that he was planning this, that he saw me not as a partner but as a problem to manage, as someone to control and discredit. That footage was my escape route, but when someone steals your identity, the evidence doesn't always clear your name so easily. Credit alerts started hitting my phone in the middle of a random Tuesday, 3 in 1 hour. New credit card account opened, auto loan inquiry, medical billing account established. My stomach dropped. I wasn't applying for anything, hadn't been shopping for a car, definitely hadn't had any medical procedures, but there it was, all in my name, all tanking my credit score in real time. I froze everything immediately, called the credit bureaus, locked down my accounts, and started the painful process of figuring out what the hell was happening. The fraud department walked me through pulling reports, and that's when I saw it. Cards I'd never opened, addresses I'd never lived at, a whole financial life that wasn't mine but carried my name, my social security number, my identity. Tracing it back took 2 weeks of phone calls, disputes, and piecing together timelines. And then I found the connection. My sister had visited 3 months ago, stayed for a weekend. I'd let her use my office to print some documents for a job application. She'd seemed stressed, said she was going through a rough patch financially, and I'd felt bad for her. I'd even left her alone in there while I ran to pick up dinner. That's when she must have done it. Gone through my files, found my social security card, my birth certificate, everything she needed. Photographed it all, probably. And then just walked out like nothing happened, hugged me goodbye, thanked me for letting her stay. The credit fraud was bad enough, but then I found the Instagram account. Someone had sent me a screenshot asking if I knew about this boutique I was supposedly running. I clicked the link and felt my entire body go cold. It was me, or rather, it was her pretending to be me. My name. Photos she'd lifted from my actual social media and edited. A whole curated aesthetic about handmade jewelry and supporting small businesses. Hundreds of followers. Posts about her journey as an entrepreneur, complete with motivational quotes and behind-the-scenes content. And there, pinned to the top of her profile, was a GoFundMe. For emergency surgery I never had. A whole story about how I'd been diagnosed with a rare condition, how insurance wouldn't cover it, how I was scared but hopeful. People had donated, thousands of dollars, strangers sending money, leaving comments about how brave I was, how they were praying for my recovery. I sat there staring at my phone, reading comment after comment from people who thought they were helping me, and I wanted to scream. She hadn't just stolen my identity for credit cards. She'd built an entire fake life, monetized my name, lied to hundreds of people and collected their money. I reported her to the police that day, filed a formal report for identity theft and fraud. They took it seriously once I showed them everything: the credit accounts, the social media, the GoFundMe, the paper trail of when she'd had access to my documents. They said it was one of the more elaborate cases they'd seen from a family member. But that wasn't even the worst part. My sister found out about the police report before they could question her, and she immediately called our parents, crying, hysterical, told them it was all a huge misunderstanding, that she'd only used my information because she was desperate, that she was going to pay everything back, that I was being cruel and vindictive by involving the police. My parents called me within an hour, begging me to drop it, saying she made a mistake but she was family, that we needed to handle this privately, that pressing charges would ruin her life. My mum actually said, "You're really going to send your sister to jail over money?" Like that's all it was. Like she hadn't stolen my entire identity and scammed strangers out of their hard-earned cash while pretending to be me. I told them no. I wasn't dropping anything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated fraud. She didn't accidentally open credit cards in my name. She didn't accidentally create a fake social media presence and beg for donations. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. They didn't understand, or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. Either way, they chose her side. Started treating me like I was the problem, like I was being dramatic and unforgiving. My dad said I was tearing the family apart. My mum stopped answering my calls, so I went scorched earth. I contacted every platform she'd used: Instagram, GoFundMe, every credit card company, every creditor. Submitted police reports, fraud affidavits, evidence of identity theft. I reached out to every single person who donated to that GoFundMe and told them the truth. Sent them screenshots of the police report. Gave them instructions on how to dispute the charges and get their money back. The accounts got nuked within 48 hours. Instagram took down her profile. GoFundMe froze the funds and started issuing refunds. The boutique that never existed vanished overnight, and the donors, they were furious. Some of them left scathing reviews on cached versions of her page. Others threatened their own legal action. A few reached out to me directly, apologizing for not vetting the campaign better, angry they'd been manipulated. Then I contacted the local news, sent them the whole story. They ran a segment about online fraud and used her case as an example. Didn't name her directly, but included enough details that anyone who'd followed the fake account would recognize it. The reporter interviewed me about the emotional impact of having your identity stolen by a family member, and I didn't hold back. Things went from bad to unhinged. My sister was charged with multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. The prosecutor said the amount stolen and the number of victims made it impossible to plead down to a misdemeanor. She tried to claim mental health issues, financial desperation, anything to reduce the charges. It didn't work. The evidence was overwhelming. She documented everything herself, posted it publicly, created a digital trail that even a halfway decent lawyer couldn't explain away. She took a plea deal eventually, avoided jail time but got probation, community service, restitution payments, and a record. The victims got most of their money back through the GoFundMe dispute process, though some had donated through other methods and just lost it. My credit's still a mess. I'm still fighting to get fraudulent accounts removed, still dealing with collections agencies, still proving over and over that I'm the real me. Our parents still think I overreacted. They've said it multiple times. At family gatherings I no longer attend. In voicemails I don't return. Through relatives who try to play mediator and suggest we all just move past it. My mum sent me a long email about forgiveness and how holding grudges only hurts yourself. I deleted it without responding. Here's the thing they don't get. She didn't just ruin my credit. She ruined my trust. In her, obviously, but also in myself, in my ability to judge people, to know when I'm being used. Every time someone asks to borrow something now, every time a friend needs a favor, there's this tiny voice in the back of my head asking what they really want. That's what she took, not just my social security number or my good credit. My ability to trust without questioning. I've rebuilt my credit. Slowly, painfully. It's climbing back up point by point. I've got fraud alerts on everything, credit monitoring, locks on all my accounts. I check obsessively. Probably more than I should. But the trust, The assumption that family means safety, that's gone, and it's not coming back. My sister still tries to reach out sometimes, emails from new addresses when I block the old ones, messages through mutual friends. She wants to apologize, she says, wants to make amends, explain herself. I don't respond. There's nothing she can say that would change anything. Sorry doesn't fix a credit report. It doesn't undo fraud. It doesn't give back what she stole. People ask if I regret going to the police, if I wish I'd handled it privately. The answer's no, not for a second. She made her choices, I made mine. She decided my identity was worth less than whatever she gained from stealing it. I decided my integrity was worth more than keeping the peace. Our parents will probably never forgive me for it. Fine, I'm not asking them to. They raised someone who thought defrauding strangers and destroying her sister's financial life was acceptable as long as she was desperate enough. That says more about them than it does about me. Identity theft is personal, but sabotage at work? That's a calculated betrayal with a paper trail. I'd spent 6 months developing this client proposal. 6 months of research, market analysis, financial projections, risk assessments, all of it. The margins were tight because the client was a startup with limited funding, but the potential for long-term partnership was huge. If we landed this account, it would be a massive win for the company and a career-defining project for me. My boss had made that clear from the start. This was my chance to prove I could handle high-stakes clients. Jen had been on my team for about a year at that point. She was one of those co-workers who's always around, always offering to help, always checking in on your progress. At first, I thought it was nice. She'd ask how the proposal was going, offer to proofread sections, suggest resources I might find useful. She had access to the shared drive where I kept all my working documents because our team collaborated on multiple projects. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? We were supposed to be on the same side. The day before the big presentation, I was doing final run-throughs, triple-checking numbers, making sure every slide was perfect. My phone rang. It was my boss, and his voice had this edge to it that made my stomach drop immediately. He told me to come to his office. Now. When I got there, he had his laptop open, and his expression was somewhere between angry and disappointed. He turned the screen toward me. The client had received an anonymous email. Someone claiming to be a concerned employee at our company had reached out to warn them that my proposal contained inflated numbers, that there were internal concerns about the viability of the project, and that they should reconsider moving forward with us. The email included specific references to sections of my proposal, details only someone with access to the full document would know. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My boss asked if I knew anything about this, if there was any truth to these concerns. I stammered through an explanation that no, the numbers were solid. I'd verified everything multiple times. I had no idea where this was coming from. He looked exhausted. He said the client was spooked and was considering pulling out entirely. All that work, all those months, potentially gone because someone had anonymously sabotaged me. I was humiliated, furious, and completely blindsided. Who would do this? And why? I ran through every interaction I'd had with the team, every conversation trying to figure out who had motive or opportunity. And then I thought about Jen. Always so helpful, always so interested in my progress, always asking to see the latest updates, but I had no proof, just a sick feeling in my stomach and a destroyed presentation that I now had to salvage somehow. Then IT ran a routine security audit. Pure coincidence, part of their quarterly review process. They flagged an unusual outbound email from our domain to an external address that wasn't in our client database. When they investigated, they traced it back to Jen's workstation. The anonymous email to my client had come from her computer. My boss called me into his office again, but this time his tone was different, apologetic. He told me what IT had found and said they were launching a formal investigation. I felt this wave of vindication mixed with rage. She'd tried to destroy my work, my reputation, and she'd almost succeeded. That wasn't even the worst part. As I dug deeper, they found that Jen had also forwarded a draft of my proposal to someone outside the company, a competitor. She'd sent it 3 weeks earlier, along with a message offering to provide additional information about our pricing strategy and client approach. The competitor had actually responded asking for more details. There were email chains, negotiations about compensation for her help, all of it sitting right there in the logs. When HR and my boss confronted her, Jen claimed her account had been hacked. She looked genuinely shocked, put on this whole performance about how she'd never do something like that, how someone must have gained access to her credentials. But the logs didn't lie. She'd logged in from her home IP address at 11 p.m., the night before she sent the anonymous email to the client. She'd used her personal login. She'd accessed the shared drive multiple times over several weeks, always late at night, always downloading documents related to my project. HR contacted the competitor to verify. They confirmed everything. Not only had they received the proposal from Jen, but they'd also had multiple phone conversations with her, where she'd provided insider information about our company's strategy. They'd assumed she was acting as some kind of unofficial liaison, maybe angling for a job with them. They seemed surprised when HR explained she'd been leaking confidential information without authorization. Jen was fired within 48 hours, escorted out by security, the whole 9 yards. No severance, no reference, just gone. HR made it clear that they were considering legal action for breach of confidentiality and corporate espionage, though I don't know if they ever followed through. I had to rebuild trust with the client, which wasn't easy, but my boss backed me completely this time. We scheduled a follow-up meeting where I walked them through the proposal again, showed them the verified numbers, explained what had happened without going into too much detail. I think they appreciated the transparency. They signed 2 weeks later. Smaller scope than originally planned, but still a significant account. The thing that really gets me is how calculated it was. Jen didn't just sabotage me on impulse. She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, copying files, building a relationship with the competitor, timing the anonymous email for maximum damage right before the presentation. She'd probably hoped the client would pull out, the project would collapse, and I'd take the fall while she positioned herself as the reliable team member who could step in. Or maybe she just wanted to tank my career for reasons I'll never fully understand. Office jealousy, resentment, who knows? The level of premeditation is what makes it hard to process. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was sustained, deliberate betrayal. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Jen was working retail at a department store. Someone from the office had run into her and mentioned it in the break room. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. She'd tried to destroy something I'd worked incredibly hard on. She'd lied to my face while actively undermining me, and she'd done it all with a smile, pretending to be helpful and supportive. The irony is that if she'd just focused on her own work instead of sabotaging mine, she probably would have advanced in the company eventually. She was competent enough, but she chose the shortcut. She chose to tear someone else down instead of building herself up. And it cost her everything. I still think about those weeks between the anonymous email and the audit results. How helpless I felt, how certain I was that my career was over, that I'd somehow failed, that I'd never figure out what went wrong, and all along the person sitting 3 desks away from me was the one holding the knife. Some betrayals happen at work, others hit closer to home, literally in your own house. I was looking for a phone charger in my dad's car. Just a random Tuesday afternoon, nothing significant about it. He'd left his SUV in the driveway with the keys on the counter, and I needed to borrow a cable before heading to work. I checked the center console first, registration papers, old receipts, a tire pressure gauge. Then I opened the glove compartment. That's where I found the phone, small, older model, tucked under the owner's manual. I almost put it back, figured it was just an old backup he'd forgotten about. But something made me pause. The screen lit up when I picked it up. No passcode. And there, right on the lock screen, were message notifications from a contact saved as M. The preview text said something about our son's recital on Thursday, and asking when he'd be coming home. Our son. I stared at those 2 words until they stopped making sense. Then I unlocked the phone, because at that point, what else was I going to do? Pretend I hadn't seen it? Put it back and go on with my day like my entire reality hadn't just tilted sideways? The messages went back years, casual conversations about grocery shopping, picking kids up from school, what to have for dinner, photos of a little boy at various ages, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, a woman I'd never seen before smiling in selfies with my dad, and through it all, this completely normal domestic life that had nothing to do with me, my mum, or the family I thought we were. I sat in that car for over an hour, scrolling through everything. There were messages about doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences, complaints about the water heater breaking, plans for summer vacation. My dad responding to all of it like it was perfectly normal, like he was just a regular guy coming home to his family. Except he already had a family. Us, me and Mom and my younger sister. Or at least I thought he did. The kid in the photos looked like him. Same nose, same smile, same dark hair. He was young, maybe 8 or 9, and there were hundreds of pictures. School plays and soccer games and random moments that parents capture because they're there, because they're present. My dad had been present for all of this, just not with us. I drove home with that phone in my passenger seat like it was radioactive. I kept glancing at it at red lights, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. But it was real. The evidence was right there, timestamp after timestamp, proving my dad had been living a completely separate life 2 towns over for what looked like at least 7 years. When he got home that evening, I was waiting in the living room with the phone on the coffee table. He saw it the second he walked in, watched the color drain from his face. He didn't even try to pretend he didn't know what it was. I asked him one question. How long? He sat down heavily on the couch, and he started crying. Actually crying. Told me it started as a mistake, a brief affair that resulted in a pregnancy, and then it just spiraled. He tried to end it, he said, but he couldn't abandon his son. So he just kept going, kept lying, kept building this second life while maintaining ours. He begged me not to tell Mom, said it would destroy her, destroy our family, that we could work through this privately. He actually used the word we, like I was complicit now, like finding out about his betrayal made me responsible for managing it. I told Mom that night, showed her everything. The phone, the messages, the photos. I watched her face go through every emotion in the span of maybe 30 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, devastation, rage. She kicked him out before he could even pack a bag properly. Just told him to get out, to go be with his other family since that's apparently where he wanted to be. And here's where things took another turn. Turned out the woman, M, didn't know about us either. She thought my dad was divorced, that his occasional absences were work-related, that she and her son were his only family. When everything came out, when Mum contacted her directly, M was just as blindsided as we were. She'd believed his lies just as completely. He'd been playing both sides, telling each family whatever they needed to hear to keep the illusion going. My half-brother is 9 years old. He's a kid who did nothing wrong and now has to grow up knowing his dad is a liar who kept him secret, that his entire childhood was built on deception. M is filing for child support. So is my mom. Dad's now financially responsible for 2 households, and in our small town, word spread fast. The man who coached Little League and volunteered at church fundraisers was suddenly the guy with the secret second family. His reputation imploded basically overnight. People I barely knew would stop me at the grocery store to say how sorry they were. Some were genuinely sympathetic. Others just wanted details, wanted to know how we didn't know, wanted to gossip. My mum stopped going to her book club because she couldn't handle the pitying looks. My sister, who's only 14, got bullied at school. Kids are cruel, and having a dad who's the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons made her an easy target. I haven't spoken to my dad in months. He's tried, calls, texts, emails, even showed up at my apartment once, but I can't. Every time I think about trying, I remember sitting in his car, scrolling through years of lies, realizing that every work trip, every late night, every weekend conference was time he spent with them, with his other son, while we waited at home, believing everything he told us. The thing that gets me most is the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was sustained deception over the better part of a decade. He maintained 2 complete lives, remembered 2 sets of schedules, 2 sets of important dates, 2 sets of problems to care about. That takes effort, planning, a level of commitment to dishonesty that I can't wrap my head around. My half-brother's name is Michael. I looked him up on Em's Facebook before she locked down her privacy settings. He likes dinosaurs and wants to be a paleontologist. In another reality, maybe we could have been actual siblings. Maybe we could have grown up knowing each other, spending holidays together, being part of each other's lives. Instead, we're just collateral damage from our father's choices. I don't know if I'll ever talk to Michael. Part of me wants to know him, wants to not let my dad's actions rob us of a relationship. But another part of me knows that every time I'd look at him, I'd be reminded of everything that fell apart. And that doesn't seem fair to either of us. Mum's doing better now. She filed for divorce, started therapy, reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with over the years. She says she should have known that there were signs she ignored. But I don't think that's fair. How are you supposed to suspect someone you love of living an entirely separate life? That's not normal suspicion. That's paranoia. And you can't live your whole life being paranoid. I found that phone 6 months ago. 6 months. And I'm still processing it. Still finding new layers of betrayal to unpack. Still realizing moments from my childhood that were probably lies. Still wondering how many times he chose them over us without us ever knowing. Secrets always surface eventually. But when your best friend hides theirs while pretending to help you, that's a whole different level of twisted. The breakup destroyed me. 3 years with someone, planning a future, talking about moving in together, and then suddenly it was over. He said he needed space to figure himself out, that he wasn't ready for the level of commitment I wanted, that it wasn't about me, but about where he was in life. All the usual lines that sound reasonable but feel like your heart being ripped out through your chest. Sarah was there for all of it. My best friend since college, the person I called sobbing at 2 in the morning, the one who showed up with ice cream and terrible reality TV to distract me. She listened to me dissect every conversation, every text message, every moment of the relationship, trying to figure out where it went wrong. She'd tell me he didn't deserve me, that I was better off, that any guy who couldn't see my worth wasn't worth my time. And I believed her, because why wouldn't I? She was my best friend. She had my back. We talked every single day, sometimes multiple times. She'd check in during her lunch break, call me on her drive home, text me goodnight reminders that I was strong and would get through this. She helped me draft texts I never sent, analyzed his social media posts for hidden meaning, reassured me when I felt pathetic for still caring. She was my rock, my therapist, my support system. This went on for 2 months, 2 months of her being the perfect best friend while I slowly put myself back together. I started feeling better, started thinking maybe I could move on, started believing the things she kept telling me about my worth and my future. And then I saw them. I was grabbing coffee at this place near my apartment, just a quick stop before running errands. And there they were, Sarah and my ex, sitting at a corner table, not just sitting together, but sitting close, his hand on her knee, her laughing at something he said, that specific laugh she does when she's flirting, the one I'd seen her use 100 times but never thought I'd see directed at him. They looked comfortable, familiar, like this wasn't their first time meeting up. I felt my chest cave in. That's the only way I can describe it. Like all the air got sucked out of my lungs and my ribs collapsed inward. I just stood there, frozen, holding my coffee, staring at them through the window. They didn't see me. They were too wrapped up in whatever they were talking about, too focused on each other. I walked in, didn't plan to, didn't think about it, just walked straight to their table. Sarah's face when she looked up and saw me is something I'll never forget. Not guilt exactly, more like someone who'd been caught but had already prepared their excuse. My ex just looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to disappear. I asked what this was. Sarah started with some story about running into him, about how they'd just been talking, how it wasn't what it looked like. But I wasn't stupid. You don't put your hand on someone's knee during a casual run-in. You don't look that comfortable with someone you barely know. So I asked again, what is this? And she told me. They'd been hooking up for 2 months, since before the breakup. She'd met up with him initially to talk about me, to understand what was going on in his head so she could help me through it. That's how she framed it, like she'd been doing research for my benefit. But then they'd connected, started talking more, started spending time together, and she'd encouraged him to end things with me, told him that if he wasn't sure about the relationship, he owed it to me to let me go, that I deserved someone who was all in. She'd orchestrated my breakup, and then she'd played therapist while I fell apart. While she consoled me about losing him, she was sleeping with him. Every pep talk, every reassurance that I was better off, every moment she spent convincing me he wasn't worth it, she was actively pursuing him herself. I don't remember what I said. I know I didn't yell, didn't make a scene. I just felt numb, hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything vital. I walked out of that coffee shop and sat in my car for an hour, just staring at nothing. Then I told everyone, our entire friend group. I didn't embellish, didn't need to. I just laid out the facts. Sarah had been sleeping with my ex since before the breakup. She'd encouraged him to end things with me. She'd spent 2 months pretending to support me while actively betraying me. I showed them screenshots of her supportive texts, time-stamped right around when she was apparently with him. The contrast was damning. Most of our friends cut her off immediately. A few tried to stay neutral at first, but the more details came out, the harder that became. Sarah tried to defend herself, claimed I was being possessive, that she and my ex had a genuine connection, that you can't help who you fall for. She actually tried to frame it as some kind of romantic destiny, like she was the protagonist in a love story, instead of someone who'd systematically betrayed her best friend. And here's where it gets absurd. 3 weeks later, he dumped her. For someone else, someone he'd apparently started seeing while he was still hooking up with Sarah. The irony was almost too perfect. She'd destroyed our friendship, blown up her reputation in our social circle, all for a guy who didn't even want her long term. He just wanted easy access to someone while he figured out what he actually wanted. Sarah tried to apologize after that, sent long texts about how she'd made a mistake, how she'd let her feelings cloud her judgment, how she missed our friendship and wanted to make things right. She said she understood if I needed time, but hoped we could eventually talk about it. I blocked her everywhere, phone, social media, email, everything, because some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment. This was sustained, calculated deception. Every time she'd comforted me, she'd been lying. Every piece of advice she'd given was tainted by her ulterior motives. Every moment of our friendship during those 2 months was fake. The worst part wasn't even losing my ex. That hurt, obviously. But relationships end, people grow apart, hearts heal. What Sarah did was different. She made me doubt my ability to trust anyone. She took the most vulnerable version of myself, the one that was broken and raw and desperately needing support, and she exploited it. She let me cry on her shoulder about losing someone she was actively sleeping with. That level of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it fundamentally changes how you see people. I don't miss her. Sometimes I miss the person I thought she was, the friend I believed I had, but that person never actually existed. The real Sarah was someone who could comfort you while stabbing you in the back, who could look you in the eye and lie without flinching, who could prioritize a guy she barely knew over a friendship that had lasted years. People ask if I'll ever forgive her. The answer's no, not because I'm holding a grudge, but because forgiveness implies she deserves another chance. And she doesn't. She made her choices. She knew exactly what she was doing, and did it anyway. She gambled our friendship on a relationship that lasted less than a month, and she lost. That's not something you come back from. The friend group's different now, smaller, but more honest. People are more careful, more protective of each other. Sarah's betrayal reminded everyone that proximity doesn't equal loyalty, that some people will sacrifice anything for what they want in the moment. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different city, started over somewhere nobody knew the story. I hope she's different now. I hope she learned something, but that's not really my concern anymore. She's not my friend. She's not my problem. She's just someone I used to know who taught me exactly how much damage a fake friend can do. Betrayal stings worse when it's wrapped in fake support. But group chats? Those are where betrayals explode in real time. My cousin had this idea to start a family group chat to plan our annual reunion. Seemed harmless enough. She added everyone, and I mean everyone. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, my grandparents who barely knew how to use smartphones, the whole extended family tree. 60 people total. It started out fine. People sharing recipe ideas, debating locations, posting throwback photos from previous reunions, the usual wholesome family stuff. Then my uncle forwarded something by mistake, and I mean a catastrophic, nuclear-level mistake. It was screenshots, lots of them. Text messages between my aunt and someone else where she absolutely tore my mum apart, called her a leech, said she was manipulative and always playing the victim, complained about how my mom had gotten help from my grandparents over the years, while other people, meaning her and my uncle, had to struggle. There were messages about a loan my grandparents had given us when my dad lost his job a few years back. My aunt called it favoritism and said my mum had probably manipulated them into it. But it wasn't just venting in the moment. These screenshots had dates going back years. My uncle had been collecting them, saving them, cataloguing every negative thing my aunt said about my mum, like he was building some kind of case file, and mixed in with the screenshots about my mum were texts where my uncle himself talked about wanting to use that loan as leverage. His exact words were, "We can bring up the loan if they get difficult about the inheritance." He'd meant to send these to my aunt privately. A quick, "Hey, remember we have this ammo if we need it" kind of message. Instead, he forwarded the entire folder to a group chat with 60 family members, including my mum, including my grandparents, including people who barely knew us but now had front row seats to years of calculated family drama. The chat exploded. I'm talking messages coming in so fast my phone couldn't keep up. My mum's texts were just question marks at first, like she couldn't process what she was seeing. Then she went silent. Other relatives started chiming in, asking what this was, why these messages existed, what was going on. My uncle realized his mistake within maybe 2 minutes and started sending all caps messages about it being an accident, that his phone glitched, that people should delete the screenshots and forget they saw anything. My aunt jumped in trying to do damage control, said it was just venting, that everyone says things they don't mean when they're frustrated, that it was taken out of context. But there was no context that made it better. These weren't heat-of-the-moment complaints. These were calculated, mean-spirited conversations that spanned years. And the stuff about using the loan as leverage? That wasn't venting. That was scheming. My grandparents demanded an explanation, in the group chat, in front of everyone. My grandmother, who normally types one word at a time with lots of typos, wrote a perfectly clear message asking my uncle to call her immediately. My grandfather, who never texts, somehow figured out how to send a message saying he was disappointed and wanted to understand what he'd just read. My uncle tried to backpedal, blamed technology, said someone must have hacked his phone or that the screenshots were doctored, except everyone could see the metadata, the dates, the times, the fact that some of these messages were from his own number talking to my aunt. There was no hacking, no glitch, just years of him collecting ammunition against my mum in case he ever needed it. And here's where things took a turn. Other family members started sharing their own stories in the chat. Cousins saying my uncle and aunt had made similar comments about them. An aunt mentioning that my uncle had once asked her detailed questions about her finances that seemed weird at the time, but now made sense if he was gathering information. People started connecting dots, realizing this wasn't just about my mum. My uncle and aunt had apparently been keeping tabs on multiple family members, categorizing who got what from my grandparents, who was struggling, who might be vulnerable. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash where every new message revealed another layer of manipulation. My mum finally responded after about an hour of silence. She didn't defend herself or argue. She just said she was hurt and needed time to process. Then she left the group chat. So did several other people. My grandparents left too. Within a few hours, half the family had exited. The chat that was supposed to plan a fun reunion had turned into a graveyard of deleted members and unanswered accusations. My uncle kept trying to salvage things. He called people individually, sent private messages, tried to explain that it all looked worse than it was. My aunt posted a long apology in the remaining group chat about how stress makes people say things they don't mean, how family should forgive each other, how this was being blown out of proportion. Nobody responded. The apology just sat there, unread receipts piling up, a monument to how badly they'd miscalculated. The reunion was cancelled. My cousin, the one who'd started the chat, posted a brief message saying that given recent events, it didn't seem appropriate to move forward with planning. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly what recent events she meant. Then my grandparents made a decision that shocked everyone. They called a family meeting, just them, my parents, my uncle and aunt. I heard about it secondhand, but apparently my grandparents spent 2 hours going through finances, asking direct questions about the loan comments, about the leverage, about what exactly my uncle had been planning. My uncle tried to laugh it off, said it was just talk, that he'd never actually do anything. My grandfather apparently looked at him and said, "But you thought about it. For years." 3 weeks later, my grandparents met with their lawyer and rewrote their will. I don't know all the details, but I know my uncle and aunt's share got significantly reduced, and the loan they'd been so focused on, my grandparents formally forgave it, put it in writing, made it clear it was a gift and not something that could be used as leverage by anyone. My uncle and aunt are now the ones ostracized from most family events. People still invite them out of obligation sometimes, but there's this coldness that wasn't there before. Nobody trusts them. Nobody wants to share personal information around them. They've become the relatives you keep at arm's length, the ones you don't tell about job troubles or financial stress because you don't know what they might be cataloging for future use. The poetic justice of it all is hard to ignore. They'd spent years building a case against my mum, collecting evidence of her supposed failures and manipulations, planning how to use family generosity as a weapon, and in one accidental group chat forward, all of that came crashing down on them instead. My mum's doing better now. She was devastated at first, spent a lot of time questioning whether she really was a burden on the family, whether she'd done something to deserve that kind of ongoing hostility. But my grandparents made it clear that wasn't true. Other relatives reached out to support her, and eventually I think she realized that the problem was never her. The problem was two people who saw family relationships as transactions, who kept score, who viewed kindness as something to exploit rather than appreciate. Karma via group chat is poetic. It really is. All those carefully curated screenshots, all that collected dirt, all those years of strategic planning, undone by one misplaced forward button. Digital evidence doesn't lie, whether it's screenshots or something even more damning, like GPS data. I'd worked toward that senior role for 2 years. 2 full years of staying late, taking on extra projects, mentoring junior staff, doing everything right. My manager, Dan, had basically promised it to me. Not in some vague keep up the good work way, but explicitly. He'd pulled me aside multiple times over the last 6 months to tell me the promotion was mine, that I should start preparing for the announcement, that he was just waiting for final approval from leadership. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I'd earned it. My performance reviews were stellar. I'd brought in new clients, streamlined processes, exceeded every metric they threw at me. So when Dan called that all-hands meeting and I saw organizational updates on the agenda, I actually felt excited. This was it, the moment all that work would pay off. Then he announced Claire's promotion to senior analyst. Claire, who'd been with the company for 8 months. Claire, who I'd literally trained on half our systems. Claire, who was competent enough but had nowhere near the experience or track record for a senior role. I sat there in that conference room, smiling like my face might crack, while everyone congratulated her. Dan wouldn't even look at me. After the meeting, I went straight to his office, asked him what happened, why he'd changed his mind, what I'd done wrong. He gave me this practice speech about how it was a difficult decision, how Claire had shown exceptional initiative, how these things are performance-based, and sometimes the timeline doesn't work out the way we hope. He said I should keep working hard and my time would come. I left feeling gutted, confused, like I'd fundamentally misread my entire career trajectory. HR gave me the same line when I requested a meeting. Performance-based decision, nothing personal. They appreciated my contributions and encouraged me to keep pursuing growth opportunities. It was corporate speak for deal with it, and I was supposed to just accept it and move on. I didn't buy it. Something felt off. The sudden switch, Dan's inability to make eye contact, the way HR seemed to have their response pre-packaged. But I had no proof of anything, just this gnawing sense that I'd been screwed over for reasons nobody was saying out loud. Then a co-worker, Jessica, pulled me aside in the parking lot after work one day. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure she should be telling me this. She showed me photos from a company conference 3 months earlier. Pictures from the hotel lobby. Dan and Claire. Kissing. Not a friendly peck. Full on, hands in hair. Nobody does that with a colleague kissing. My stomach dropped. Suddenly everything made sense. The promotion. The lies. The complete lack of transparency. Dan hadn't promoted the best candidate. He'd promoted the person he was sleeping with. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I talked to other co-workers who'd been at that conference. Turned out Dan and Claire hadn't exactly been subtle. They'd shared meals, disappeared together, showed up to sessions late looking disheveled. People had noticed, but nobody had said anything because, well, office politics. You don't accuse your manager of having an affair unless you're sure and ready for the fallout. I found text messages, not between Dan and Claire directly, but screenshots other people had taken of suspicious Slack conversations that had been quickly deleted, inside jokes that were way too familiar, references to meeting up that had nothing to do with work. I documented everything with timestamps and witnesses. Then I filed a formal complaint with HR. Not just a general grievance, but a detailed report with evidence, photos from the conference, testimony from co-workers, timeline of Claire's rapid promotion despite minimal qualifications. I laid it all out and made it clear I wasn't going away quietly. HR had no choice but to investigate, and once they started digging, the whole thing unraveled. Turned out Dan had hired Claire knowing her from a previous job where they'd hooked up years ago. He'd never disclosed the relationship or the conflict of interest. He'd put her on his team specifically, bypassed normal hiring protocols to make it happen, and then fast-tracked her promotion while stringing me along with false promises. The investigation took 3 weeks, 3 weeks of awkward office tension where everyone knew something was happening but nobody talked about it directly. Dan tried to act normal, but you could see the stress eating at him. Claire stopped coming to team meetings. The whispers in the break room were constant. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. HR fired Dan, not a resignation, not a quiet exit. Terminated for conflict of interest, nepotism, and creating a hostile work environment. They walked him out the same day they delivered the decision. Claire was reassigned to a different department, demoted back to her original position, and basically made it clear she had no future at the company. I got called into a meeting with the VP of Operations and HR. They apologized. Actually apologized. Said the promotion should have been mine from the start, that Dan's behavior was unacceptable, and that they were correcting the situation immediately. I was promoted to senior analyst with back pay for the 3 months I should have already been in the role. They also offered to cover a professional development course of my choice as additional compensation for what they called the mishandling of the situation. The professional fallout for Dan went beyond just losing his job. His wife found out about the affair. I don't know exactly how, whether he told her or she figured it out from the circumstances, but she left him, filed for divorce within a month. The company added a note to his employment record about the termination reason, which meant his references were basically destroyed. In our industry, in our city, word gets around. People talk. Claire quit 3 months after being reassigned. She couldn't handle the looks, the whispers, the fact that everyone knew exactly why she'd gotten promoted and exactly why she'd lost it. She tried to keep her head down and rebuild her reputation, but the damage was done. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different state and was working in a completely different field. I still work at the company, got another promotion last year actually, this time legitimately based on merit and with full transparency. But the whole experience changed how I view workplace dynamics, how much people are willing to compromise for personal gain, how easily trust can be weaponized. The thing that still bothers me is how close Dan came to getting away with it. If Jessica hadn't shown me those photos, if I hadn't pushed back, if I'd just accepted HR's initial brush-off, he'd probably still be there, still playing favorites, still lying to employees about their prospects while advancing his own interests. And I'd probably still be stuck in the same position, wondering what I was doing wrong. Office affairs crash and burn publicly, but family crimes, those stay buried until you realize what you helped cover up. My cousin called me late on a Thursday night, voice shaky, asking for a favor. Said he'd been in a fender bender, nothing serious. But the other driver was being difficult and he just needed me to say he'd been at my apartment that evening if anyone asked. I was half asleep, barely processing what he was saying, and I just said, sure. He was family. It sounded minor. Why wouldn't I help? I didn't think about it again until 2 days later when detectives showed up at my door. Actual detectives with badges asking if my cousin had been at my residence on Thursday evening. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about a fender bender. You don't get detectives for a minor traffic incident. I asked what this was about, and they told me there'd been a hit and run that put someone in the hospital. Critical condition. The driver had fled the scene and they were trying to establish a timeline. My blood went cold. I stood there in my doorway, realizing I'd already lied for him. Already told him I'd cover for him, but I hadn't known, hadn't understood what I was agreeing to. The detective asked me again, very clearly, was your cousin at your apartment Thursday evening between 8 and 10 p.m.? And I had a choice. Double down on the lie, become an accomplice to whatever he'd done, or tell the truth and deal with the fallout. I told them the truth, said my cousin had asked me to lie, that I'd agreed without knowing the details, that he wasn't actually with me, and that I was sorry for initially misleading them. They took a full statement, asked me to come down to the station to make it official. I did. Sat in an interview room and laid out exactly what my cousin had said, when he'd called, what he'd asked me to do. My cousin was arrested the next day, and that's when my family exploded. My aunt called me screaming, literally screaming, called me a traitor, said I'd destroyed her son's life, asked how I could do this to family. My uncle sent a text saying I was dead to them. Cousins I barely talked to were posting vague things on social media about loyalty and betrayal. The family group chat, the one we used for birthdays and holiday planning, turned into a war zone with people taking sides. But here's what they weren't talking about. The victim was a 20-year-old college student. She'd been walking to her car after an evening class when my cousin hit her. He'd been driving drunk, swerved onto the shoulder, struck her, and then panicked and drove away. Left her there bleeding on the side of the road. A jogger found her 20 minutes later and called an ambulance. She'd needed emergency surgery for internal bleeding and a shattered pelvis. She was in the ICU for a week. My cousin had gone home, parked his damaged car in his garage, and then called me to establish an alibi. Not because he'd made a mistake, because he'd made a choice. He chose to drink and drive. He chose to flee the scene. He chose to let a young woman suffer alone instead of calling for help. And then he chose to try to get away with it. When I found out those details, when the full story came out during the investigation, I felt sick, not just because of what he'd done, but because I'd almost helped him get away with it. If I'd stuck to that lie, if I'd told the detectives he was with me, he might have walked, and that girl would have had no justice, no accountability, nothing. My family didn't want to hear it. They kept framing it like he'd made a mistake, like everyone deserves a second chance, like I should have protected him because that's what family does. My aunt sent me a long email about how her son's life was ruined now, how he'd lose his job, how he'd have a record, how I'd destroyed his future over one bad decision. I didn't respond because her son had destroyed someone else's future first. That college student had to drop out for a semester, had to go through months of physical therapy, still has chronic pain, still has anxiety about walking alone. My cousin's consequences were legal and deserved. Hers were permanent and unearned. Then came the breaking point. The prosecution offered my cousin a plea deal. He could plead guilty to DUI and hit and run causing serious injury, accept a reduced sentence, and avoid trial. His lawyer advised him to take it. The evidence was overwhelming. My statement, the damage to his car, surveillance footage from a nearby gas station that caught his vehicle in the area, his own phone records showing he'd called me minutes after the incident. He pled guilty, got 3 years in prison with possibility of parole after 18 months, lost his license for 10 years, has to pay restitution to the victim. My family acted like this was some terrible miscarriage of justice, like the system had failed him. They started a fundraiser for his legal fees, posted about how he was a good person who made one mistake, asked people to write character references for his sentencing hearing. I didn't contribute, didn't write a letter, didn't show up to support him in court, and that made me the villain in their eyes. My aunt won't speak to me at all, blocked me on everything. My uncle sends occasional messages about how disappointed he is, how I chose strangers over family. Some cousins tried to stay neutral at first, but eventually drifted toward my aunt's side because it was easier than dealing with the conflict. My parents are torn, they understand why I told the truth, they say they might have done the same thing, but they also wish I'd found a way to handle it that didn't fracture the family. Like there was some magical option where I could have been honest without consequences, but that's not how it works. The truth has a cost, and sometimes you have to decide if you're willing to pay it. I don't regret it, not even a little. I think about that college student sometimes, wonder how she's doing, if she's back in school, if she's healing. I'll never meet her, Will probably never know her name, but I know I did the right thing by her, by not helping someone escape accountability for nearly killing her and then running away. My cousin made choices. He chose to drink. He chose to drive. He chose to flee. He chose to lie. And when those choices caught up with him, he chose to try to drag me into his mess. Every step of the way, he had options, and he consistently picked the worst one. Some mistakes aren't mistakes, they're choices, and I won't be complicit in someone's suffering just because we share DNA. Family isn't supposed to mean covering for crimes. It's not supposed to mean protecting people from consequences they earned. And if my family can't understand that, if they'd rather ostracize me than hold him accountable, then maybe I'm better off on the outside. The victim's family sent a statement to the court during sentencing, talked about their daughter's injuries, her trauma, her ongoing recovery, about the fear and confusion of not knowing who'd done this to her, or why they didn't stop to help. My cousin had to sit there and listen to it, had to hear exactly what his choices had cost someone else. I hope it mattered. I hope somewhere in there he understood. But I don't know. And honestly, it's not my responsibility anymore. I told the truth. The rest is on him. Covering for someone can trap you in their lies. But when location data proves someone's lying to you, that's when everything collapses. My partner had been working late a lot. Like, a lot. 3-4 nights a week, sometimes more. They'd text around 7 saying they were stuck at the office, had a deadline, would be home late, don't wait up. I'd gotten used to it. Annoyed, sure, but I trusted them. We'd been together for 3 years. You don't question every late night when you've built that kind of history with someone. Except one night I was bored and paying our phone bill online. We're on a shared plan, have been since we moved in together. One of those couple things you do to save money. I was clicking through the account details, not really looking for anything, just procrastinating on actual work, when I noticed the location services section. I'd never paid attention to it before, but there it was. A log of location history for both our phones. I clicked on their number. Just curious, maybe a little paranoid, but mostly just filling time. And that's when I saw it. Weeks of location data showing them at an address across town. Not their office, not anywhere near their office. The same address consistently, multiple nights a week, always during those hours they said they were working late. My stomach dropped. I copied the address and reverse searched it. Apartment complex. A nice one, actually, in a part of town we talked about moving to someday. I stared at the screen, trying to come up with an innocent explanation. Maybe a coworker lived there and they were carpooling. Maybe there was a project site nearby. Maybe the GPS was glitching. But the timestamps were too consistent, too deliberate, and they lined up perfectly with every night they told me they were at the office. I didn't confront them right away. I needed to be sure. So the next time they texted saying they'd be working late, I drove to that address. Sat in my car in the parking lot like some kind of stalker, feeling pathetic and furious and sick all at once. And there it was, their car, parked in a designated spot like they belonged there. Like this was routine. I sat there for 2 hours, watched lights go on in a third-floor apartment, saw shadows moving past the windows. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Part of me wanted to go up there, knock on the door, make a scene, but another part of me knew I needed to stay calm, needed to collect myself before I did something I'd regret. I drove home and waited. They came back around midnight, apologizing for being so late, complaining about their demanding boss and the project that never seemed to end. I listened to them lie to my face and didn't say a word, just nodded, said I understood. Watched them shower and get into bed next to me like everything was normal. The next morning, I confronted them with screenshots, pulled them up on my laptop over coffee, location history highlighted, timestamps clear as day. Asked them to explain why their phone showed them at this specific address for hours every time they claimed to be at work. They stammered. Their face went white. They tried the I can explain routine, but nothing coherent came out at first, just fragments of sentences that didn't connect. Finally, they admitted they'd been staying with a friend. To clear their head, they said. We'd been arguing more lately, and they needed space to think, and they didn't know how to tell me without making things worse. I asked who the friend was. They hesitated too long before answering, and that's when I knew. The friend was an ex, someone they'd dated years ago before we met, someone they'd always stayed friends with in a way that made me slightly uncomfortable, but that I'd never push back on because I didn't want to be that jealous partner. They'd been sleeping there for a month, not just visiting, not just talking things through, sleeping there. Every night they told me they were working late. They were actually at their ex's apartment, and they'd lied, consistently, repeatedly, looked me in the eye and lied. They swore it wasn't physical, that they were just talking, just processing their feelings, just trying to figure out if our relationship was what they wanted. They made it sound like some kind of therapeutic soul searching, like they were doing the responsible thing by taking space instead of making rash decisions. But the location data told a different story. They were there until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning most nights. Sometimes they didn't leave at all, stayed until morning, and went straight to work from there. You don't spend that kind of time with someone, especially an ex, especially while lying to your current partner, unless something is happening. I ended it on the spot, told them to pack a bag and stay with their friend since that's apparently where they wanted to be anyway. They tried to argue, to explain, to promise it wasn't what I thought, but I was done. The lying was bad enough. The location, the ex, the month of deception, all of it added up to something I couldn't come back from. They left that afternoon, took some clothes and toiletries and said they'd come back for the rest of their stuff later. I changed the locks the next day. Petty? Maybe. But I needed to feel like I had control over something, like I could protect my space from any more intrusion. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing how easy it had been for them to lie, how naturally the excuses had come, how many nights I'd gone to bed alone, believing them, trusting them, while they were across town doing God knows what with someone they supposedly had moved on from. I moved out a week later. We'd been renting, both our names on the lease, but I couldn't stay in that apartment, couldn't sleep in that bed, couldn't walk past the kitchen table where they'd sat lying to me over breakfast. I found a sublet, packed my stuff, and left. They could deal with the lease. I was done dealing with anything that tied me to them. Friends asked if I was sure, if maybe I was overreacting, if we could work through it with counseling. But how do you work through a month of sustained, calculated deception? This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a choice they made every single night for weeks. The location history was the proof I needed to walk away clean. No second guessing, no wondering if I'd misread the situation. Just cold, hard data showing exactly where they'd been and exactly how much they'd lied. There's something clarifying about that kind of evidence. It removes all the ambiguity, all the emotional manipulation, all the gaslighting attempts. They tried to reach out a few times after I moved. Texts apologizing, asking to talk, saying they'd made a mistake. I blocked them, didn't respond, didn't engage. What was there to say? The data had already told me everything I needed to know. People ask if I ever found out whether it was actually physical with the ex. Honestly, I don't care. The lying was enough. The month of deception was enough. Whether they were sleeping together or just having deep emotional conversations until 3 in the morning doesn't change the fundamental betrayal. I'm in a better place now. New apartment, new routines, new perspective on what I'm willing to tolerate in a relationship. And I learned something important about trust. It's not just about believing someone when they speak. It's about whether their actions align with their words. And when those things diverge, when the data contradicts the story, you have to be willing to believe what you're seeing instead of what you're being told. GPS doesn't lie, but people do. Especially when they've built a pattern of deception that finally catches up to them. Rachel filed an HR complaint against me on a Tuesday. I found out when my manager pulled me into a conference room and told me there'd been an allegation of creating a hostile work environment, specifically that I'd yelled at Rachel during a meeting and made her feel unsafe. I just stared at him, completely confused, because I'd barely interacted with Rachel beyond basic pleasantries in the break room and the occasional project-related email. I asked which meeting, when this supposedly happened, what I'd allegedly said. My manager looked uncomfortable and said he couldn't share details while the investigation was ongoing, but that HR would be reaching out and I should prepare to provide my account of events. I left that room feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. A hostile work environment complaint is serious, the kind of thing that goes in your permanent file, that affects promotions, that can tank your reputation even if it's ultimately dismissed. HR contacted me the next day. scheduled a formal interview where they asked me about my interactions with Rachel, my communication style, whether I'd ever raise my voice in meetings. I answered honestly, said I'd worked with Rachel on exactly one project, a minor collaboration where I'd provided some data she'd requested. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen emails total, all professional, all polite. I'd never yelled at anyone at work, let alone her. They asked me to provide documentation, so I pulled every email I'd ever sent to or received from Rachel, printed them out, highlighted the relevant sections. Every single message was cordial. Please and thank you, and let me know if you need anything else. There was nothing even remotely aggressive or hostile. I handed over the stack and watched the HR rep flip through it with an increasingly puzzled expression. But HR still had to complete their investigation. They interviewed other team members who'd been in meetings with both of us. Nobody could recall me yelling. Nobody had witnessed any hostile interaction. If anything, people said I was one of the more easygoing people on the team, that I went out of my way to avoid conflict. And that's when I started wondering, why would Rachel make this up? What did she gain from filing a false complaint? I couldn't figure out the angle, so I did what any person with internet access and too much anxiety would do. I started digging. Rachel's LinkedIn showed she'd worked at 2 companies before ours, both for less than 2 years. Both ended with vague language about seeking new opportunities and professional growth. I searched her name combined with the company names in Google. Nothing came up directly, but I noticed she was connected to several people from those previous jobs. I reached out to a few of them, kept it professional, said I was doing some background research for a work matter, and wanted to understand team dynamics at their company. Most didn't respond, but 2 people did, and what they told me made everything click into place. Rachel had filed HR complaints at both previous jobs. Different accusations, same pattern. At the first company, she'd claimed a manager was discriminating against her based on gender. The investigation found no evidence, but Rachel had made such a fuss, created so much tension, that they'd transferred her to a different team just to resolve the situation. At the second company, she'd accused a co-worker of sabotaging her work. Again, investigation found nothing, but Rachel had played the victim so convincingly that the company had quietly moved her to another department. She had a system: file a complaint, make herself the center of attention, create enough drama that the company would appease her by moving her away from whoever she'd targeted. Then, when the environment became uncomfortable because people knew what she'd done, she'd leave and start fresh somewhere else. I compiled everything: LinkedIn profiles of the people I'd spoken to, screenshots of their messages confirming Rachel's history, dates showing the pattern across 3 different companies over 5 years. I added my own documentation, the emails proving our interactions had been completely professional, and I sent it all to HR with a cover letter explaining what I'd found. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. HR called Rachel in for a follow-up interview, confronted her with the pattern, asked her to provide specific evidence of my alleged hostile behavior. She couldn't. She kept saying she felt targeted, that the environment made her uncomfortable, that she had a right to feel safe at work. All true statements in a vacuum, but completely unsupported by any actual evidence. They asked her about the previous complaints. She got defensive, said those situations were different, that she was being victimized again by having her past brought up, that this was exactly the kind of treatment she'd been complaining about. But HR wasn't buying it anymore. They'd seen the documentation. They'd talked to witnesses. They knew. The complaint against me was dismissed, officially closed with no findings of wrongdoing. HR sent me a letter confirming it, apologizing for the stress of the investigation and noting that false complaints are taken seriously. They warned Rachel that filing unsubstantiated complaints could result in disciplinary action, up to and including termination. Rachel didn't take it well. She started telling people she was being retaliated against, that HR was protecting me because I was friends with management, which wasn't even true. She posted vague things on social media about toxic workplaces and corporate corruption. She stopped coming to team meetings, would show up late and leave early, clearly checked out. A month later, she quit. Sent a dramatic resignation email to the entire department about how she couldn't continue working in such a toxic culture, how the company prioritized profit over people, how she hoped we'd all learn to treat each other with more respect. The irony was almost too much. She was lecturing us about respect after trying to destroy my reputation with a fabricated complaint. I kept my job, kept my sanity mostly, but the whole experience changed how I interact with people at work. I document everything now. Every meeting gets a follow-up email summarizing what was discussed. Every conversation that could remotely be construed as controversial gets confirmed in writing. It's exhausting and it shouldn't be necessary, but I learned that some people will weaponize HR processes if they think they can benefit from it. The thing that still bothers me is that Rachel will probably do this again. She'll get hired somewhere new, work there for a year or two, file another baseless complaint when things don't go her way, and the cycle will continue. Because unless companies start doing deeper background checks, unless former employers start being willing to share information about this kind of behavior, there's nothing stopping her. She kept her pattern, and somewhere out there, someone else is probably dealing with her right now, wondering why they're being accused of something they didn't do, going through the same confusion and anxiety I went through. Patterns of lies always surface, but some people control narratives so well that only hard evidence can crack their facade. My aunt had always been the family historian, self-appointed of course, but nobody challenged it because, honestly, who wants that job? She kept photo albums, remembered everyone's birthdays, organized reunions, and most importantly, she controlled the narrative. Every family story went through her filter. Every conflict, every disagreement, every piece of drama got her spin before it reached the rest of us. And her spin always, always made her the victim, the misunderstood one, the person who sacrificed everything while everyone else was selfish. She'd rewrite history so smoothly that you'd start questioning your own memories. You'd remember an argument one way, and she'd tell it back to you completely differently until you wondered if maybe you'd gotten it wrong. My mum had issues with her for years, but mostly kept quiet, said it wasn't worth the fight, that my aunt would just twist anything she said into more evidence of persecution. So we all just nodded along while my aunt crafted this mythology of herself as the family martyr who nobody appreciated. Then my grandmother passed away, and suddenly the stakes of my aunt controlling the narrative got a lot higher. At the funeral, my aunt was distraught, genuinely grieving, I think, but also performing grief in a way that made sure everyone noticed. She kept talking about how close she and my grandmother had been, how she'd taken care of her in her final years, how much she'd sacrificed, which was partially true. She had helped with my grandmother's care, but so had my mom. So had other relatives. My aunt just made sure everyone knew about her contributions, while downplaying everyone else's. A week after the funeral, my aunt announced to the family that my grandmother had promised her the house, the family home where my grandmother had lived for 40 years. My aunt said they'd discussed it extensively, that my grandmother wanted her to have it because she'd been so devoted, because she understood its sentimental value. My mum was blindsided. She'd assumed the house would be handled according to my grandmother's will, which she thought left it to her as the oldest child. But my aunt kept insisting my grandmother had changed her mind, had wanted things handled differently, had made promises that superseded whatever legal documents existed. Then my aunt produced a letter, handwritten, signed by my grandmother, dated 6 months before she died. It said she wanted my aunt to have the house, that she trusted her to preserve the family legacy, that this was her final wish. The letter looked legitimate, the handwriting looked right, and it threw everything into chaos. My mom was devastated, not just about losing the house, but about the implication that my grandmother hadn't trusted her, had chosen my aunt over her, had kept this decision secret. The family started taking sides. Some believed the letter, said we should honor my grandmother's wishes. Others were skeptical but didn't want to cause conflict. Something about it felt off to me. The timing, the convenient appearance of this letter right when my aunt needed it, the theatrical way she'd revealed it. So I asked my mom if I could look through my grandmother's papers. She'd kept everything, files and files of documents, letters, records going back decades. I spent 2 days going through boxes in my mum's garage, and I found the original will. My grandmother had left the house to my mum, explicitly, in clear legal language drafted by her attorney 3 years before she died. No ambiguity, no mention of changing her mind or making promises to my aunt. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found emails, printed out and filed away because my grandmother printed everything important. Emails from my aunt pressuring her to change the will, asking why my mom was getting the house when my aunt had done so much more for the family, suggesting it was unfair that my grandmother owed her, that she deserved recognition for her sacrifices. And my grandmother's responses, polite but firm, saying she'd made her decision, that the will reflected her wishes, that she loved both her daughters equally, but had her reasons for the distribution she'd chosen. In one email, she explicitly told my aunt to stop asking, that it was causing her stress, that the matter was settled. The last email in the chain was from my aunt, 6 months before my grandmother died, right around when that letter was supposedly written. My aunt saying she understood, that she respected my grandmother's decision, that she just wanted her to know how much the house meant to her. My grandmother never responded to that one. I took everything to the family lawyer, showed him the will, the emails, the timeline. He looked at the letter my aunt had produced and said it would need to be authenticated. But based on what I'd found, it seemed likely my grandmother's legal will would take precedence regardless. Then I did something my aunt probably didn't expect. I scanned everything, the will, the emails, all of it, and I posted it in the family group chat with a simple message explaining what I'd found and when. The chat exploded, but this time the explosion wasn't in my aunt's favor. People could see the emails, could see my grandmother explicitly refusing to change the will, could see the dates and timeline, could see that the letter my aunt produced appeared right after my grandmother told her the decision was final. My aunt tried to do damage control, said the emails were out of context, that she and my grandmother had discussed it more after that the letter proved her final wishes, but nobody was buying it anymore. Too many inconsistencies, too much evidence against her version. The family lawyer got involved officially. The letter my aunt produced was examined by a handwriting expert. Turned out it was my grandmother's handwriting, but the ink and paper were inconsistent with when it was supposedly written. The expert couldn't definitively say it was forged, but raised enough questions that combined with the email evidence, it became clear what had likely happened. My aunt had probably written it herself, or pressured my grandmother into writing something vague that she then held onto and produced at the right moment. Or maybe she'd forged it outright and gotten lucky with the handwriting. We'll never know for sure because she stopped engaging with the process entirely. Things went from bad to unhinged. My aunt went scorched earth. Started posting on Facebook about family betrayal, about ungrateful relatives, about how my grandmother would be ashamed of us. She tried to rally support, but most people had seen the evidence. Her credibility was shattered, all those years of controlling the narrative, and it collapsed in a week. The house went to my mom per the legal will. My aunt contested it briefly, but her lawyer advised her she had no case. The emails alone showed my grandmother's clear intent. My aunt dropped the challenge and cut off contact with most of the family. She hasn't spoken to us since, blocked everyone who sided against her, stopped coming to family events, removed herself entirely from the family ecosystem she'd once controlled. Some relatives feel bad about it, think maybe we should have handled it privately. That airing everything in the group chat was harsh, but I don't regret it. My aunt had spent decades controlling information, shaping narratives, making herself the center of every story. She'd weaponized that control to try to take something that wasn't hers. The truth needed to be public because her lies had been public, because she'd used the family's trust in her as the historian against them, because the only way to break that pattern was to show everyone the receipts at once. My mum has the house now. She's been slowly going through it, sorting my grandmother's things, preserving the actual family history instead of the curated version my aunt had been selling. And every time we find another document, another letter, another piece of evidence of how things really were, it reinforces that we made the right call. The truth won. Finally, after years of my aunt's version dominating every conversation, the actual facts got their moment, and her entire carefully constructed mythology crumbled under the weight of documentation she couldn't explain away. Controlling the story only works until someone brings receipts, but walking into a room and realizing the celebration is for your replacement, that's a gut punch in real time. I got a calendar invite on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject line just said team celebration, with no other details, no context in the body of the email, just a time and the main conference room. I figured maybe we'd landed a new client or hit some quarterly goal I'd forgotten about. We did those kinds of things occasionally, spontaneous celebrations when something went well. I was actually excited, could use some good news and free cake. I walked into the conference room right on time, balloons everywhere, a sheet cake on the table with our company logo. Most of the team already there, chatting and laughing. The energy felt weirdly elevated, like something big was happening. My boss was standing at the front of the room with someone I didn't recognize, a guy maybe in his early 30s, wearing a suit that looked too new. My boss called everyone to attention and started this speech about growth and change and welcoming new talent to the organization. I stood there smiling, assuming we'd hired someone for a different department, maybe expanding a team I worked adjacent to. Then he said it. He introduced the new guy as the incoming senior analyst. My role, my exact title. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually be sick. I looked around the room. People were clapping, smiling, nobody was looking at me. And that's when it hit me. They all knew, everyone in this room knew this guy was replacing me, except me. I was attending my own replacement party. I sat down in the nearest chair because my legs felt unstable. My boss kept talking, going on about the new hire's impressive background, his experience at some competitor firm, how excited we should all be to have him join the team starting next month. Next month. Like I'd just vanished between now and then, and nobody needed to explain how or why. People kept clapping. Someone made a joke about training the new guy on our coffee machine. Light laughter. Normal office banter. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there processing the fact that I'm being fired and found out about it at a celebration with balloons. The meeting wrapped up. People grabbed cake, started introducing themselves to my replacement, who seemed genuinely nice, which somehow made it worse. I just sat there, frozen, trying to figure out if this was real or if I'd misunderstood something fundamental. Then my boss walked over, casual, like we were about to chat about weekend plans. He looked at me and said, "Oh, we were going to tell you next week, but since you're here, we should probably talk." Since I'm here. At the party celebrating the person taking my job. The party I was invited to without explanation. He suggested we step into his office. I followed, numb. He closed the door and started this rehearsed speech about organizational restructuring and shifting priorities and how my role was being eliminated. Not my performance, he assured me. Just business decisions. I'd get 2 weeks severance and could use him as a reference. I asked when they'd decided this. He said about 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. They'd known for 6 weeks that they were replacing me and hadn't said a word. Had let me come to work every day, complete projects, attend meetings, plan for a future at this company that didn't include me. I asked why I wasn't told before today, before this humiliating disaster of a meeting. He looked uncomfortable, said they wanted to have the replacement secured before creating uncertainty on the team, that it was cleaner this way, cleaner. Like I was a mess they'd efficiently managed instead of a person who deserved basic respect. I walked out of his office, grabbed my jacket and left. Didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't grab my stuff from my desk. Just walked out of the building and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what had just happened. That night, I filed for unemployment. The next morning, I consulted an employment lawyer, explained the situation. The lawyer's eyes widened when I described the celebration, the lack of notice, the way it all went down. Turns out they'd violated several protocols. You can't just eliminate a position while simultaneously hiring someone into that exact role without it being a termination. And they hadn't given proper notice or followed their own company policies outlined in the employee handbook. My lawyer sent a letter. The company's legal team responded within 48 hours. They wanted to settle, offered severance, extended health insurance, and a confidentiality agreement. We negotiated. I got 3 months' salary, 6 months of benefits, and a neutral reference agreement. Not life-changing money, but more than the 2 weeks they'd initially offered. And here's where it gets absurd. My replacement, that nice guy in the new suit, lasted exactly 4 months. I heard through a former coworker who I'd stayed in touch with that he couldn't handle the workload, couldn't adapt to the company culture, and quit right before they were probably going to fire him. All that planning, all that restructuring, all that humiliation they put me through, and the person they replaced me with couldn't even make it half a year. The company tried to reach out to me after he left, asked if I'd consider coming back as a contractor to help with the transition. I didn't even respond, just deleted the email and moved on with my life. Because by then, I'd started my own consulting firm, reached out to clients I'd worked with at the old company, offered my services independently. Turns out a lot of them had been more loyal to me than to the company. I signed 3 contracts in my first month. Built from there. No boss, no surprise celebration meetings, no wondering if I'm about to be replaced while eating cake. I'm doing better now than I ever did working for them. Making more money, setting my own hours, working with people who actually value what I bring. And every time I invoice a client, especially one that used to go through my old company, I think about that conference room, the balloons, the cake, my boss's casual, "Oh, since you're here," like he was doing me a favor by letting me know I was fired. The whole experience taught me something important about corporate loyalty. It doesn't exist. Companies will make whatever decisions benefit them and frame it as inevitable business needs. They'll throw you a party for your replacement and act like you should be grateful for the opportunity to attend. But it also taught me that I'm capable of more than I thought. That getting pushed out, as humiliating and painful as it was, forced me to take a risk I probably wouldn't have taken otherwise. I'd have stayed in that job, comfortable and complacent, maybe for years. Instead, I got pushed into building something of my own. So, yeah, they replaced me, threw a party about it, violated employment law in the process, and accidentally gave me the motivation and severance package to start a business that's now more successful than the role they eliminated. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always comes out, whether it's through receipts, recordings, or just someone finally brave enough to speak up. If you made it this far, you're part of the community now. Subscribe, drop a comment about which story hit hardest, and I'll see you in the next one. Sleep well and don't let the drama keep you up unless it's this good.